The marble floor of Bayou Trust Bank gleamed under the weight of morning light, polished to perfection, designed to impress. Clerks whispered behind the counters, their eyes already locked on the figure pushing open the brass-framed doors. He was just an old man, thin shoulders beneath a weathered brown coat, the kind of coat that belonged to a different era. The sack hanging from his hand sagged with age, the coarse fabric frayed, the color dulled from years of use. To most of the room, Samuel Reed looked like trouble wandering in from the wrong side of New Orleans. A pair of security guards straightened as if on cue, their palms resting casually on their belts. A businessman in a pinstriped suit clicked his watch as if insulted by the intrusion. Near the teller line, a woman leaned down to whisper to her friend, lips curling in amusement. The sound spread quickly. Laughter disguised as curiosity. Murmurs dressed as judgment. Samuel didn't flinch. He kept walking, each step slow but steady, shoes scuffing softly against the stone. His eyes carried a calm that contrasted with the hostility swelling around him. He stopped at the center of the lobby, beneath a chandelier of glass and brass, where the light cut across his lined face. He adjusted the sack on his shoulder and let his voice rise clear and even. "This bank," he said, "belongs to me." The silence lasted only a second. Then the room broke open with laughter. A chorus of disbelief, sneers escaping lips painted with privilege. The woman at the counter nearly doubled over. A young man by the deposit slips raised his phone, recording while his friends grinned. The guards began to move, boots striking the marble in deliberate rhythm. From an office behind frosted glass, Colin Pierce, the branch manager, stormed out. His gray hair was sculpted, his suit immaculate, his eyes sharpened by disdain. "Sir," he announced, voice cutting through the crowd, "you will need to leave immediately." Samuel's hand shifted on the sack. "I have documentation," Pierce sliced the air with his palm. "The only paper you'll be seeing is the exit notice." "Remove him!" His audience chuckled, emboldened by his performance. The guards took Samuel by the arms. One hand gripped tight, forcing his coat across his shoulders. Another reached for the sack. "You're making a mistake," Samuel said. Tone calm, almost gentle. "The mistake," Pierce replied, voice dripping with contempt, "was letting someone like you walk in here at all." The phrase landed like a stone in water. For a moment, the laughter dimmed, replaced by a silence that was not respect, but curiosity. What did he mean, someone like you? But no one spoke. The guards pulled harder, dragging Samuel toward the glass doors. His shoes scuffed against the floor, leaving faint marks that would soon be scrubbed away. Halfway to the exit, the sack slipped from his grasp. It hit the marble with a dull thud, then burst open. Paper spilled across the floor, scattering like leaves in a storm. Not trash, not cans, but thick, cream-colored documents, stamped, sealed, edged in gold. The laughter died. One sheet landed near the teller's station, close enough for Alana Brooks, the youngest clerk, to reach. She bent down, hesitant, and held it to the light. Her breath caught. "This is a deed," she said quietly, though the room heard her. "It has his name." Samuel Reed. The marble chamber froze. Phones stopped recording humiliation and began recording history. A retired banker knelt, adjusting his glasses to study another page. His voice trembled. "These are originals. State seals. The kind you can't forge." The guards loosened their hold, uncertain. Pierce barked, "Nonsense! They're fake. Throw him out!" He bent, snatching one document, crushing its edge in his fist. But the seal pressed into the paper glinted against the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The proof could not be crushed. Samuel straightened, the weight of humiliation falling away. He knelt slowly, gathering the papers with care, each movement deliberate. As he did, his fingers brushed against something cool and metallic at the bottom of the sack. He drew it out and rose to his full height. It was a brass key, long, heavy, worn smooth from decades of handling. Its teeth caught the light, projecting sharp edges across the marble. He held it up for all to see. "This," Samuel said, voice low but unshakable, "is the master key to the original vault, Dupree Safe Company. Serial number 242719, installed on March 12, 1963. combination set to Thomas Whitaker's birthday, February 12th, 1925. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. The retired banker inhaled sharply. The guards shifted uneasily, and Colin Pierce, his composure cracked. His eyes widened just for a second before he forced a brittle laugh. "An old man with a flea market key," he sneered, though sweat rose on his forehead. Samuel lowered the key, sliding it into the inside pocket of his coat. "Keys don't lie," he said quietly. People do. The lobby was no longer theater for ridicule. It had become a stage for revelation. Everyone present could feel it. Something buried deep beneath polished brass and glass was clawing back toward the light. And as police sirens began to echo faintly from the street outside, the question hung heavy in the air. Had they just laughed at the rightful owner of Bayou Trust Bank? The sirens outside faded into the hum of traffic, but inside the bank, the silence was suffocating. Every eye remained locked on the old man who stood alone in the center of the marble floor, his documents stacked carefully in his arms, the brass key resting against his chest like a relic. Samuel Reed looked neither triumphant nor afraid. He looked steady, as if he had been waiting 50 years for this exact moment. Colin Pierce adjusted his tie with a trembling hand, forcing authority back into his posture. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cracking before he steadied it, "what you are witnessing is nothing more than a desperate display. This man is a fraud, a charlatan. But the words rang hollow. No one laughed this time. A few of the onlookers moved closer, their curiosity outweighing fear of confrontation. Alana Brooks, still holding one of the documents, spoke again, this time louder. "This isn't desperation. These records are authentic. Look at the typeface, the watermark. This isn't the kind of paper you pick up at an office supply store." Her defiance hung in the air, cutting through the manager's bluster. For the first time, Colin seemed rattled, his face flushing as he barked at the guards. "Get her back to the counter now!" The guards hesitated, torn between their boss's command and the shifting mood of the crowd. Samuel met their eyes, calm but unyielding. "You've spent your lives protecting vaults full of money," he said. "But what you should have been protecting was the truth locked inside them." A murmur ran through the lobby. An older man in a bowler hat, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "I remember your name," he said slowly. "Samuel Reed. It was in the papers back in '63, wasn't it? Something about a new charter? I was a teller then, just a kid." His memory cracked open like a door long sealed, and the room leaned in. Colin's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. Ancient history, nothing more." But Samuel's voice carried over him, firm and deliberate. "History doesn't vanish because men like you decide to bury it. It waits, it remembers, and sometimes it shows up holding a key." The old man in the hat nodded. "Yes," he whispered, almost to himself. "I remember there being two names, two founders." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Gasps scattered across the room. Colin lunged forward, snatching the document from Alana's hands, waving it angrily in the air. "Forgery! Lies! This will not be tolerated." His voice rose, shrill and desperate. But the evidence was spreading too quickly. Phones captured every word, every flicker of his panic. Alana, standing taller now, turned toward the gathering crowd. "If these records are false, then why are you so afraid of them being seen?" The question stung. The crowd muttered in agreement, their skepticism shifting away from Samuel and onto the man who claimed authority. Colin's face blanched, his confidence dissolving under the weight of scrutiny. Samuel's voice cut through again, calm and measured. 50 years ago, I built something with my own hands and my own savings. Then I was erased, pushed out of the very house I helped build. Today, I'm not here for pity. I'm here to unlock what was stolen." He tapped the brass key against the top sheet of documents. The sound echoed sharp as a gavel. One of the guards stepped back, his hand falling from his belt. The other shifted uneasily, exchanging a glance with his partner. The balance of power was tilting, and everyone could feel it. Colin raised his voice one last time. "Do not listen to this man. He is nothing. He is no one!" Samuel's eyes hardened. "If I am no one, then why does my name appear here, stamped in ink, sealed by the state, and preserved in a vault your family tried to erase?" He held up the charter, its embossed seal glinting like a witness that could not be silenced. The crowd pressed closer. The banker in the bowler hat whispered, "God help us, he's telling the truth." At that moment, the heavy glass doors swung open. Two uniformed officers entered, their footsteps echoing across the marble floor. The crowd parted instinctively. Collins straightened, relief washing across his face. "Officers! Remove this man at once! He's trespassing, causing a scene." But Samuel raised the key in his hand before they could move. His voice was steady, unwavering. "Before you decide, know this. I can open the oldest vault in this bank. I can show you ledgers untouched for half a century. Numbers don't lie. Steel doesn't lie. And when I do, the question will not be whether I belong here. The question will be, who among you doesn't?" The words struck like a verdict. The officers hesitated, exchanging a look that betrayed doubt. The crowd buzzed louder, sensing the tide shifting. Phones tilted higher, cameras rolled steady. The balance of the room had changed. Samuel bent slowly, gathered the sack, and with deliberate calm began walking, not to the exit, but deeper into the bank, toward the corridor that led to the vaults. Each step reverberated across the marble, louder than the jeers that had greeted him minutes before. The crowd followed with their eyes, silent, waiting, unsure if they were watching the ramblings of an old man or the return of the bank's rightful founder. And as he disappeared down the hall, the question lingered heavy and unanswered. Had the betrayal buried in Bayou Trust Bank finally met the man patient enough to unearth it? The smell of smoke and oak lingered in the memory of 1963, a year New Orleans could not erase. Back then, Bayou Trust Bank had been nothing more than an idea scratched on paper, two men standing side by side in a rented office above a corner diner. One was Thomas Whitaker, sharp-tongued and politically connected, his family name already heavy with privilege. The other was Samuel Reed, younger but hungrier, carrying savings pulled from construction contracts, hauling brick and steel with his own hands until his knuckles bled. In those days, Samuel had believed in partnership. He had believed that if two men signed their names on a charter, the law would bind them tighter than blood. He brought capital, land deeds, and most importantly, community trust. Black families who had been denied loans elsewhere looked to him, a man who spoke their language and walked their streets. Whitaker brought lawyers, a family crest, and an understanding of how power whispered in smoke-filled back rooms. Together they formed a bank. At least that was the promise. The early years hummed with ambition. Samuel sat across from Thomas at long oak tables, reviewing ledgers that smelled of fresh ink. He signed promissory notes, approved mortgages, and argued for fair terms. Thomas smiled, raised glasses of bourbon, and told him, "We're changing history." Samuel believed him, until the first papers went missing. It started small. A ledger misplaced, a memorandum rewritten with dates that felt slightly off. Samuel noticed but trusted explanations. The bank was growing and mistakes happened, yet the errors always seemed to chip away at his side of the partnership. A clause amended without his initials. A shareholder report listing his stake as 49% instead of 51%. He confronted Thomas once in the quiet of the boardroom. "This line," Samuel said, tapping the page, "it changes my share." "It's not what we agreed." Thomas leaned back in his chair, smoke curling from the cigar between his fingers. Clerical slip. "I'll have it fixed." His voice was smooth, confident, dismissive. Samuel wanted to believe him. He needed to. But the slips became patterns. In the vault, Samuel found a file where his signature appeared cut and pasted, the edges ragged under close light. The ink didn't match, a faint shimmer where the pen had once pressed too hard. He lifted the page, tilted it, and the truth glared back at him. Forgery. The realization sat heavy in his chest. Betrayal rarely arrives as a shout. It creeps in as silence, sealed envelopes, and pages doctored by steady hands. Samuel confronted Thomas again, this time with the forged page in his grip. "This isn't a mistake," he said. "It's a theft." Thomas's smile never faltered. "You've been working too hard. Take a week. Rest. We'll sort it out when you're thinking clearer." And just like that, the conversation ended. But Samuel knew what had begun. the slow erasure of his name from the very institution he had helped breathe into life. As the years passed, his role shrank. Meetings scheduled without him. Decisions made behind closed doors. When he protested, minutes were produced showing his agreement. When he demanded to see the originals, he was told they'd been misplaced or destroyed in routine cleaning. Every protest tightened the noose. He became the troublesome partner, the inconvenient witness, until one day he was no longer a partner at all. A notice arrived bearing the seal of the board, declaring that Samuel Reed had sold his shares. His signature sprawled across the bottom, except Samuel had never held the pen. The betrayal was complete. The man who had poured his savings, sweat, and trust into Bayou Trust was erased with ink and lies. That night, Samuel walked the streets of New Orleans, the neon glow of Bourbon Street mocking him with promises of fortune. He clutched the few papers he had salvaged, receipts, early drafts of the charter, letters from Thomas that spoke of partnership and equality. They were scraps, but scraps of truth. He stuffed them into a canvas sack, vowing never to let them go. 50 years later, that same sack would fall open on the marble floor of the bank, spilling its contents for the world to see. But back then it was only a burden, only a reminder that trust, once betrayed, rots like wood left in the rain. The seed of betrayal had been planted in 1963. By the time Samuel recognized it, the roots had already wrapped around the walls of Bayou Trust Bank. And in those roots lay the question that would haunt him for decades. Had he been naive, or had the system never intended to let him stand as an equal? The answer was written in silence, in pages that vanished, and in the smirk of a partner who had always known power would protect him. And yet, even as the betrayal swallowed his name, Samuel kept the key. He kept the documents. Because deep down, he believed what Whitaker never had, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always leaves a trail for the patient to follow. The trail of betrayal was not just in missing papers. It was in the way conversations ended the moment Samuel walked into a room, in the sideways glances between directors who once greeted him with warmth. Power has a smell, cigars, polished wood, bourbon poured into heavy glasses, and Samuel began to notice he was no longer invited to the rooms where that smell lingered. Minutes of board meetings arrived at his doorstep with his name printed neatly beside abstained or approved, even though he had never been present. He would storm to Thomas's office, demand an explanation, and always hear the same refrain: clerical oversight, nothing more. But the pattern was too precise, too consistent. Every oversight shifted advantage away from Samuel and into the hands of Whitaker's bloodline. The cruelest blow came in the form of a photograph. At first glance, it was nothing remarkable. A board meeting captured in grainy black and white, men in dark suits leaning across a long oak table. But Samuel froze at the image of himself, smiling faintly, pen in hand, as if endorsing a contract. He remembered the day. The meeting had been for routine quarterly reports. No contracts, no transfers. Yet the photograph was later attached to documents that claimed he had signed away his majority stake. Someone had staged it. Someone had placed papers before him, asked him to pose, then used the photograph as proof of consent for a deal that never happened. It was betrayal dressed as memory, a lie so carefully woven it looked like truth to anyone who did not know better. Samuel fought. He demanded state investigators review the ledgers. He filed petitions, wrote letters, knocked on doors of attorneys who would not meet his eyes. But the Whitaker name weighed heavy in New Orleans. Judges were friends of friends. Clerks owed favors. Doors closed faster than they opened. And slowly, Samuel's reputation twisted. Whispers spread that he had squandered his fortune, that he had sold willingly and now sought pity. The community he once championed turned cautious, unsure whether to believe him or the bank that still held their mortgages. By the mid-1970s, Samuel had lost more than a partnership. He had lost his seat at the table, his financial footing, his standing in a city that thrived on perception. Whitaker interests grew fat while his name shrank from ledgers, replaced by silence. The betrayal was complete. Not only had they stolen his shares, they had rewritten the story so thoroughly that most forgot he had ever been there at all. But betrayal leaves scars, and Samuel refused to let his fade. He began cataloging the fragments he still possessed. Drafts of the original charter bearing his pen strokes, receipts for capital contributions, letters written in Thomas's own hand acknowledging Samuel's role as majority founder. He sealed them in envelopes, slipped them into the canvas sack, and added the master key to vault number 1857. The key was more than metal. It was his anchor, proof of a time when his presence could not be erased. For decades, the sack remained by his side. He carried it through job after job, through apartments rented by the month, through winters where heat cost more than food. People mocked him, said the old man carried trash. But Samuel knew. Trash did not carry state seals. Trash did not rattle with brass that once turned the tumblers of a bank vault. There were nights when bitterness almost consumed him. Nights he wondered if keeping those papers was nothing more than keeping wounds open. Friends urged him to let go, to live what years remained without the weight of betrayal. But Samuel shook his head. Betrayal only wins if you accept silence, he would say. I am not silent, and so he waited. Patient, stubborn, weathered by time, but not broken by it. He watched the Whitakers expand their empire, turning Bayou Trust into a monument of glass and steel. He watched them rewrite speeches that omitted his name, polish plaques that praised Thomas alone. Every new branch built, every gala funded, was a reminder of what had been stolen. Yet Samuel did not vanish. He walked past those branches with his sack in hand, a ghost haunting the empire that had erased him. The betrayal had taken everything but his resolve. And that resolve, carried across 50 years, was a blade sharper than any forged in Whitaker steel. Because Samuel understood something Thomas never had. Betrayal may wound, but patience sharpens the wound into a weapon. And when the day came to return, when the sack spilled across the marble of Bayou Trust Bank, the roots of that betrayal would finally be torn into the light. For betrayal is not just the act of one man against another. It is a seed planted in secrecy, watered by silence, and grown into an institution. But even the tallest tree can be felled if the roots are exposed. And Samuel had carried those roots in a canvas sack for half a century, waiting for the moment to show the world how deep they went. The morning Samuel chose to return, the city of New Orleans moved as if nothing remarkable was about to happen. Streetcars rattled their familiar rhythm along Canal Street. Vendors set up stalls in the French market, hawking pralines and chicory coffee. Tourists wandered with cameras pointed skyward, capturing wrought iron balconies that had seen centuries of secrets. To the city, it was an ordinary day. But to Samuel, it was the culmination of 50 years of waiting. He dressed with deliberate care. The suit was not new, but it was pressed, its charcoal threads catching the faintest glimmer of morning light. His shoes, polished by hand, still bore faint cracks, scars of years that refused to be erased. Around his shoulder hung the sack, no longer the battered relic people mocked, but the vessel of memory, evidence, and vindication. In its weight he carried not just documents, but decades of betrayal bound in yellowed paper and brass. As he approached Bayou Trust's grand downtown branch, Samuel's steps slowed, not from hesitation but from reverence. The building rose before him like a fortress of marble and glass. Carved columns framed its entrance, whispering of Greek temples and old power. Inside, he knew, gleamed polished brass fixtures and the smug laughter of men who had inherited wealth stolen from his hands. But Samuel no longer came as the outcast. He came as the rightful owner, ready to open wounds they thought had scarred over. The security guards at the door barely glanced at him at first, accustomed to dismissing anyone who did not arrive in tailored splendor. But their eyes caught on the sack, on the way Samuel carried it not like a beggar but like a man bearing law. Their shoulders stiffened, hands twitching toward radios. Samuel met their gaze, steady, calm. "I am here for my bank," he said simply, his voice quiet but unyielding. Inside, the lobby pulsed with mid-morning business. Customers shuffled in line, some tapping at phones, others murmuring to tellers. A chandelier hung heavy above, its crystals scattering sunlight across the marble floor. Conversations faltered when Samuel stepped into the center of the room. Some laughed quietly, assuming another eccentric had wandered in. Others pulled out phones, sensing a spectacle about to unfold. Samuel's eyes swept the room, landing on the brass plaque mounted behind the teller counters. Founded 1963, Thomas Whitaker, visionary and builder. His jaw tightened. The plaque was a lie carved in metal, the kind of lie people believe simply because it hung high on a wall. He raised his voice, letting it echo against marble. "This bank belongs to me." The words cut through the room like a blade. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then laughter erupted, harsh and echoing. A man in a tailored suit clutched his stomach, wheezing between guffaws. A woman with pearls whispered too loudly, "Another madman." Phones lifted higher, capturing the scene, eager for ridicule to post online. Yet Samuel did not flinch. He stood taller, his dignity etched into every line of his weathered face. He reached for the sack, loosened its knot, and let the first document fall onto the marble. It landed with a weight heavier than paper should carry. Customers craned their necks as gold seals glinted under chandelier light. Notary stamps bled through aged fibers. A retired banker near the line squinted, recognition dawning. That's a founding charter," he murmured. The laughter faltered. Samuel reached again, spreading more across the floor. Deeds, contracts, correspondence bearing signatures from decades past. Each document was a stone pulled from a riverbed, revealing what currents had buried. Murmurs replaced laughter. Whispers of real and authentic drifted through the crowd. Even the security guards hesitated, their grips loosening on radios as curiosity outweighed orders. From the manager's office, a door slammed open. Richard Whitaker, grandson of Thomas, stormed out, his face flushed with indignation. His voice boomed, dripping with the arrogance of inherited power. "Remove this man immediately!" he barked. "He's a fraud. These papers are nothing but fabrications." Samuel turned slowly, meeting Richard's eyes with the steady calm of one who had endured humiliation for half a century. "You know who I am," he said. "And you know what this key opens." From his coat pocket, he drew the brass master key, its worn surface catching the light. The lobby stilled. Even phones lowered as eyes fixed on the small piece of metal that shimmered with authority older than Richard's entire career. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Richard's expression. His words stumbled, faltering between anger and fear. But Samuel did not press further. He simply stood, the documents at his feet, the key in his hand, and the truth hanging thick in the air. The moment was not triumph yet, nor vindication. It was revelation, a crack in the marble facade. A reminder that betrayal, no matter how carefully buried, cannot remain hidden forever. And as the crowd shifted uneasily, torn between doubt and belief, Samuel asked the question that would carry them into the next chapter. If lies built this empire, how long before it crumbles under the weight of truth? The silence after Samuel's question pressed heavy against the marble walls. Even the ticking of the grand lobby clock seemed muted, as if time itself had paused to hear the answer. But none came. Customers exchanged uneasy glances. Tellers froze mid-motion, hands hovering above keyboards. The laughter that had filled the air moments earlier had curdled into a tense, expectant hush. Richard Whitaker broke first. His voice, sharp and desperate, sliced through the stillness. "You think a sack of old papers will undo 50 years of progress?" His sneer deepened, but his eyes betrayed him. Darting toward the key Samuel held, unable to mask recognition. "Anyone with a printer and imagination can make forgeries." Samuel bent down, unhurried, gathering one of the yellow deeds. His movements carried the weight of ritual, deliberate and reverent. He held it high under the chandelier's glow, letting the gold notary seal gleam for all to see. "This," he said quietly, "was signed in 1963. Ink does not lie. Paper remembers what men try to erase." A woman from the crowd stepped forward, adjusting her glasses as she examined the document. Her breath caught audibly. This is real. Look at the embossing, the seal of the state. These aren't forgeries." Phones rose again, but this time they recorded not mockery but revelation. Richard's jaw tightened. "Enough!" He turned to the security guards. Remove him! Now! But the guards hesitated, caught between the authority of the manager and the gravity of what they had just witnessed. One shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "Sir, maybe we should wait, at least until the police arrive." As if summoned by the words, red and blue lights flared outside. Two officers entered, their boots echoing sharply against marble. Relief spread across Richard's features. "Officers," he declared, pointing toward Samuel. "This man is trespassing. He's disturbing business with fraudulent claims. I demand you arrest him." The taller officer stepped closer, his eyes scanning the scattered documents before turning to Samuel. "Sir, what's going on here?" Samuel did not flinch. He reached into his sack once more and withdrew the brass key. He lifted it slowly, letting the sunlight from tall windows strike its worn surface. The crowd leaned forward, pulled by its gravity. "This," Samuel said firmly, "is the master key to the original vault, installed when this bank first opened its doors. Serial number 847392, manufactured by Mosler Safe Company. Installed by technician James Wilson. The combination was set to your father's birthday, Richard. February 12th, 1925. A ripple passed through the crowd. Even the officers exchanged startled glances. The retired banker who had lingered near the front gasped. "Those are details only an original founder could know." Richard's face drained of color before he forced a brittle laugh. "Ridiculous. That's just some flea market trinket." But his voice cracked at the edges, betraying fear. Sweat formed on his brow despite the cool air conditioning. The shorter officer raised a hand, stopping his partner from moving forward. "We should verify. If this man has legitimate claims—" "Legitimate claims?" Richard snapped, his mask slipping into raw anger. "He's a delusional old man clinging to fantasies. Arrest him before this spectacle spirals further." But the spectacle had already grown beyond his control. Dozens of phones captured every second. Live streams buzzed across the city, comments flooding with debates. Is it true? Could he really own the bank? Mariah, the young teller who had been silent until now, stepped out from behind her counter. Her hands trembled, but her voice carried clear. She held one of the scattered documents, examining it closely. "This isn't fake," she said firmly. "It's at least 50 years old. And it bears his name, Samuel Duval." Richard whirled on her, fury igniting in his eyes. "Put that down or you'll be out of a job." His shout echoed harshly, cracking the fragile balance in the room. But Mariah did not retreat. She tightened her grip on the paper, standing taller than her trembling frame suggested. The crowd shifted again, murmurs swelling. Some customers nodded toward Samuel, others frowned at Richard's rage. The tide of opinion, so easily steered by power, now leaned toward doubt. Samuel gathered the last of his papers, tucking them gently back into his sack. His voice remained steady, undimmed by the chaos around him. "You can throw me out again. You can mock me, call me mad, threaten my allies. But know this, truth is patient. It does not vanish because you will it. It waits, like seeds under winter frost. And when it breaks through, no hand can stop its bloom." The officers hesitated, caught between orders and conscience. Richard barked at them again, but his words seemed thinner now, less commanding. The key still gleamed in Samuel's hand, undeniable in its quiet authority. Samuel took one deliberate step forward. "So I ask you all," he said, letting his gaze sweep across the lobby, across the phones, the whispers, the doubt etched into faces. "If you were lied to for 50 years, would you choose comfort in the lie or the pain of the truth?" The question hung in the air like incense, lingering, impossible to ignore. Customers shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their phones, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Others leaned in, hungry for more. The officers still hadn't moved, their hands hovering near belts but not drawing. For the first time, Richard Whittaker realized control was slipping from his grip. His voice, once booming with authority, came out hoarse. "This is nonsense," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Samuel turned toward him, steady and deliberate. "You know me, Richard. You know who I am, and you know what your grandfather did." His words were not accusations hurled in anger. They were calm, spoken like a verdict already passed. That calmness cut deeper than rage. Richard's jaw clenched. He looked around at the crowd, faces waiting, cameras recording, eyes questioning. For decades, his family had commanded silence, respect, obedience. But now silence was breaking, and the truth was leaking into daylight. He snapped his fingers at the guards, desperate. "Get him out, now!" The larger guard reached for Samuel's arm. But before contact was made, Samuel's voice rose again. "Careful. These documents are legal property. To take them without a warrant is theft. And theft," his gaze locked on to the officer nearest him, "is still a crime." The officer froze. The guard hesitated. For a moment, the balance tilted toward Samuel. But Richard was not finished. He turned toward the officers, feigning calm authority. "This man is dangerous. He's disturbing the peace, disrupting business, threatening customers. I want him arrested immediately." Mariah stepped forward, clutching the document she still held. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "Officers, please. Look at these papers before you act. They're real. He's telling the truth." Richard rounded on her, his fury scorching. "One more word and you're finished here, girl." The slur hung sharp and ugly in the air, cutting through any pretense of civility. Gasps rippled across the lobby. The young teller flinched, but she didn't back down. "Then I'll finish with the truth," she said, louder now, her defiance drawing eyes. "These papers prove Mr. Duval's claim. This bank was built with his money, his vision. And your family stole it?" The crowd stirred, voices rising, whispers hardening into questions. "Could it be true? I saw the seals. Those papers were old. Why's the manager so scared?" The tide was shifting. What had begun as spectacle was transforming into trial, with the crowd as jury and Samuel as witness. Richard's composure cracked. He waved at the officers, desperation bleeding into his tone. "Enough! Arrest them both if you have to!" But the taller officer shook his head slowly. "Sir, without a warrant or clear evidence of a crime, our hands are tied." He looked at Samuel, then Mariah, then the papers strewn across the marble floor. "And from where I stand, it looks like there's more here than you want to admit." Phones buzzed, capturing every word. Livestream comments exploded. "He's stalling." "Why's the cop hesitating?" "The old man's got him cornered." Samuel stooped, gathering the last of his scattered evidence. He slid the documents carefully into his sack and straightened with quiet dignity. His voice softened, but carried farther than Richard's shouting ever had. "The truth waits. I've carried it for half a century. Today you've seen a glimpse of it. Tomorrow, you'll see it all." He turned toward the doors, the officers instinctively parting to let him pass. The crowd parted too, their faces no longer filled with mockery, but with something sharper. Doubt, curiosity, even shame. Each step Samuel took toward the exit felt heavier, not with defeat, but with inevitability. As he reached the glass doors, sunlight poured across his suit, illuminating the brass key in his hand. He paused, looked back once more at Richard, and said quietly, "You've just thrown out your owner. Remember this moment. Remember it well." The doors closed behind him, the sound final, like a gavel striking. Inside, the lobby buzzed with murmurs. Customers exchanged theories. Tellers whispered nervously. Mariah, still clutching the fragile document, pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching Samuel's figure shrink into the crowd outside. She felt her pulse in her fingertips, a rhythm of fear and determination. Something had begun that could not be undone. Richard barked orders. "Back to work! This never happened!" But his voice lacked conviction. The footage was already spreading across social media. Clips of Samuel's words, the flash of the brass key, Mariah's defiance. Within hours, the city would be arguing, debating, dissecting every frame. And as the marble lobby tried to return to routine, one truth lingered above the hum of whispers. The story was no longer under Richard's control. It belonged to Samuel now, and to the world watching. The streets outside buzzed with the same rhythm they always had, streetcars clattering, horns blaring, vendors shouting, but Samuel felt every sound differently now. Each footstep away from the bank was heavy with both humiliation and vindication. They had dragged him out once again. Yet this time, he had not walked away empty-handed. The world had seen the papers. They had seen the key, and once truth escapes into daylight, it cannot be shoved back into shadows. On the corner, a group of teenagers leaned against a wall, watching him with sly grins. One lifted his phone, replaying the viral clip. Samuel's own voice rang tinny through the speaker. "This bank belongs to me." The teenagers burst into mocking laughter. "Hey, old man," one shouted. "You gonna buy the corner store too?" Another cackled. "Don't lose your trash bag, boss man." Samuel didn't answer. He adjusted the sack on his shoulder and kept walking. He had learned long ago that ridicule is the cheapest weapon of the fearful. But in their laughter he heard something else, a tremor of uncertainty. Even mockery spreads the story. When he reached the quieter blocks of his neighborhood, the noise of downtown faded into the creak of old porches and the murmur of radios behind open windows. Here, people had known him for decades as the quiet man with endless papers, the one who always walked with purpose but rarely spoke. Mrs. Johnson, who ran the corner store, stepped out and handed him a cold bottle of water. Concern etched deep lines across her face. "Zeke," she said softly, calling him by the nickname only old neighbors used. "They're making a fool of you on the news. My grandson showed me clips already. But I know you. You don't fight unless you've got truth on your side." Samuel nodded, taking the bottle. Truth doesn't vanish, May. It just waits for the right moment. Inside the store, a small TV flickered. News anchors replayed shaky cell phone footage of the confrontation. Split screens showed panels of experts debating, some dismissing him as delusional, others pointing to history, to the long trail of black entrepreneurs stripped of their legacies through fraud and force. Samuel watched silently as the anchor concluded, "The city waits to see if this is madness or a revelation." He returned to his apartment that evening, climbing the same cracked steps, unlocking the same stubborn door. The small room welcomed him with its familiar order. Boxes labeled by year, cabinets filled with files, the steamer trunk resting under his bed. To anyone else, it might have looked obsessive. To Samuel, it was survival. Decades of betrayal cataloged and preserved. He set the sack beside the trunk and lowered himself into a chair. His bones ached, but his spirit was sharp. He reached for the brass key, setting it on the table. Its dull glow seemed alive in the lamplight, a relic that carried more weight than all the bank's polished marble. He whispered to it, almost in prayer. "We are not done." The phone rang suddenly, jarring him from his thoughts. The old flip phone buzzed against the table, its plastic scratched but still reliable. Samuel frowned. Calls rarely came. Most who once cared were long gone. He flipped it open cautiously. "Mr. Duval?" A young woman's voice came through, tentative but steady. "This is Mariah. From the bank." Samuel leaned back, closing his eyes. He could see her face in his memory, the only one who had dared to speak truth inside that marble tomb. "Yes," he said quietly. "I remember. I'm sorry," she rushed on. "For everything. The way they treated you?" It wasn't right. None of it was right. And those papers, they were real, weren't they? Samuel traced the edges of the key with his thumb. "What makes you think that?" "I work with documents every day," she said, her voice firmer now. "Mortgages, deeds, loan titles. I know the difference between paper aged by time and paper printed last week. Yours were real. I couldn't just walk away after seeing them." He let the silence stretch, measuring her words. Trust was not something he gave freely, not anymore. "You could lose your job for this call." "I know," she said without hesitation. "But some things matter more than a job. Your story matters, and I want to hear it. I want to help." Samuel opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling where shadows gathered in corners. For years he had carried this burden alone, waiting for the right moment, the right ally. Perhaps she was that moment. Perhaps her voice was the spark the truth needed. He lifted the key, letting it catch the dim lamplight. "It's not a pleasant story," he said at last. "But yes, it's one that needs to be told." And as he spoke those words, Samuel understood that the fight was no longer his alone. The truth had found a witness and a beginning. Morning crept into the city with the smell of chicory coffee drifting from corner cafes and the chatter of early commuters spilling from buses. But Samuel wasn't drawn to the bustle of downtown. Instead, he sat in the back booth of Lou's Diner, a place where time seemed reluctant to move. The vinyl cracked under his weight, and the hum of a ceiling fan filled the silences between clinking cups. Here, surrounded by grease-stained menus and chipped mugs, he waited. The bell above the door jingled, and Mariah entered. She moved cautiously, scanning the room as if expecting eyes to follow her. She wore plain clothes, a blouse and a dark skirt, but her shoulders carried the tension of someone walking a dangerous line. When she spotted Samuel, her breath caught, and she hurried over. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth. Samuel gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. No need to whisper here. Just folks having breakfast." She poured with shaking hands, spilling a few drops. "I couldn't sleep after what happened. Those documents. They keep replaying in my mind. And the way Richard, threatened you? Threatened me? It was wrong. All of it." Samuel studied her for a long moment. She was young, but her eyes carried the spark he once had, the fire to see injustice undone. Slowly, he reached into his coat and slid a manila folder across the table. 1963, he said. The year this all began. I had a vision. A bank for everyone. A place where race or wealth didn't decide your worth. I invested everything I had, my father's real estate inheritance, my own savings. And Thomas Whitaker, Richard's grandfather, brought the connections. Together, we built Bayou Trust. Mariah opened the folder. Inside was a yellowed clipping from the city paper. New bank opens downtown. A partnership of promise. The grainy photo showed two young men, one black, one white, standing proudly in front of the building. Her breath caught. "That's you." She touched the image as though afraid it might vanish. Samuel nodded, his eyes drifting to the window where sunlight slanted across cracked linoleum. For a time, it was good. But power changes men. 6 months later, documents began disappearing. My signature erased, shares transferred without my consent. By the time I realized the trap had already closed. Mariah shook her head. "He stole it from you. Piece by piece." Samuel laid out more. Bank statements, notarized letters, correspondence in Thomas's hand. They used the courts against me, knowing the world would trust a white businessman's word over mine. They called me bitter, delusional. But I did not vanish. I built elsewhere, quietly. Real estate, oil rights, community projects, and I kept every scrap of proof. Every page. Mariah's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Why now? Why come back after all these years? Samuel tapped the brass key resting on the table. Its metal glowed faintly under the diner's dim light. Because truth has a season, and lies can't outlast it forever. But I can't do this alone anymore. I need someone inside, someone who can reach the records they've buried. Her pulse quickened. She heard the weight of the request, the danger it carried. But she also heard her grandmother's stories, of men who built legacies only to see them stolen, of voices silenced by power. She drew a deep breath. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." Samuel searched her eyes, looking for hesitation, but found none. He slid another envelope toward her. Inside was a copy of the original deed. "Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, this must survive." Mariah tucked it quickly into her purse, her hands trembling but resolute. "They'll fight back. You know that. They already are," Samuel said quietly. Richard's call to his uncle wasn't just panic, it was strategy. They'll move fast, discredit me, bury me again if they can. But this time, I won't be alone. She straightened, her fear hardening into resolve. "Then we'll move faster. I'll start searching the archives tomorrow. Carefully." A shadow moved across the diner window. Two men in dark suits lingered by a black sedan, one raising a camera, snapping photos through the glass. Samuel noticed but didn't flinch. He sipped his coffee. "Let them watch. Let them think they know what's coming." Mariah glanced nervously over her shoulder. "They're not even trying to hide it, because arrogance makes men sloppy," Samuel replied. "And arrogance will undo them." Outside, the city thrummed on, oblivious. Inside, in the hum of a nearly empty diner, a pact was made, not of paper, but of courage. Samuel leaned closer, his voice low but fierce. "You've shown me more bravery in one day than most in a lifetime. Remember this, once the truth begins to rise, no power can hold it down." Mariah nodded, gripping her purse tightly. She knew life would never be the same after this meeting. Neither did Samuel. The war for the soul of Bayou Trust had just begun. The following days carried an edge of unease. Samuel felt it in the way footsteps lingered too long outside his apartment, in the rustle of newspapers folded down when he entered a cafe, in the silence that followed when his name surfaced on the evening news. Bayou Trust had always been a monument of wealth, but now it was also a fortress scrambling to defend itself. And Samuel knew, when power feels threatened, it bares its teeth. Mariah confirmed it with her late-night calls. "They've started shredding documents," she whispered one evening. "I saw boxes rolled into the basement marked for disposal. Files that haven't been touched in decades. They know you're coming, Mr. Duval. They're cleaning house." Samuel sat at his small kitchen table, the brass key resting in front of him like a compass. "That means they're afraid," he said softly. "And fear leaves mistakes." On the other end of the line, her breath trembled. "What if they come after you?" "After me? They already have," Samuel replied. "But fear cuts both ways. Let them try to bury the evidence. We'll find what they can't destroy." The next morning, headlines erupted. Bayou Trust under fire. Local man claims founding stake. Talk shows debated his sanity. Some analysts dismissed him as a relic chasing ghosts. Others, more cautious, admitted the documents shown in grainy phone footage looked uncomfortably real. The story spread like a fever, forcing the bank's executives to act. Richard Whitaker held a press conference under the glare of cameras, standing stiff in a blue suit. "These allegations are absurd," he declared, voice strained behind a practiced smile. "Bayou Trust is and always has been a Whitaker institution. This so-called claimant is exploiting sympathy and confusion. We will not be distracted from serving our clients." But even as he spoke, the world saw what he didn't mean for them to see, the sweat shining on his forehead, the dart of his eyes, the way his hand trembled when he adjusted his notes. The image told a different story than his words. Meanwhile, Mariah slipped Samuel a copy of internal memos. In them, the Whitakers discussed strategies to discredit him, smear campaigns, planted stories about his mental state, whispers of debt and instability. Samuel read them silently, his expression unreadable. At last he looked up at her and said, "They think they're fighting a man. They don't see they're fighting history." That night, Samuel sat in his dim apartment sorting documents into neat piles, letters in Thomas Whitaker's hand, receipts of his contributions, a photograph of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, his face half hidden behind Thomas's shoulder. Each piece was a fragment, but together they formed a mosaic of truth. He laid them out on the floor, the brass key resting in the center. When Mariah arrived, she gasped. "It's all here," she whispered. "Enough to prove everything," Samuel nodded. "Enough to start. But proof isn't only for courts. It's for people. When the world sees the depth of betrayal, then justice will follow." As if to punctuate his words, a stone shattered his front window. Glass sprayed across the room. Mariah screamed. Samuel didn't move. He simply stared at the jagged hole where the night air now poured in. Outside, footsteps ran into the darkness. A message had been sent. "They're warning you," Mariah whispered. "They're warning themselves," Samuel corrected. He reached down, carefully gathering the scattered pages before the breeze could carry them away. His movements were steady, deliberate. "Paper remembers. Ink does not fear glass." Mariah knelt beside him, helping collect the pieces. Her hands shook, but her resolve hardened. "Then let's show the world," she said. "Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now." Samuel met her gaze, a faint fire rekindling in his tired eyes. For 50 years he had borne the weight of betrayal alone, but no longer. With allies by his side and truth spilling beyond the walls of Bayou Trust, he knew the reckoning was near. He set the documents back into the sack, tied it tight, and slid the brass key into his pocket. His voice was quiet, but it carried the force of a promise. "They've spent half a century erasing me. Tomorrow we erase their lies." The night outside was restless, full of whispers and shadows. But inside, in the broken light of a shattered window, Samuel Reed and Mariah Brooks prepared for battle, not of fists or bullets, but of paper, memory, and truth too long denied. And as the city slept, unaware of the storm rising, One truth sharpened like steel. Betrayal can wound, but exposure cuts deeper. And the cut was coming. Dawn broke with a weight that felt different, as though the city itself sensed the shift. The skyline of New Orleans gleamed in pale gold, but the air carried a charge, sharp and electric. Today would not be routine. Today, Bayou Trust would be forced to answer. Samuel stood before a mirror, fastening the last button of his charcoal suit. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was anticipation, the kind that grows when decades of silence are about to rupture. He adjusted his tie, slipped the brass key into his inner pocket, and lifted the canvas sack onto his shoulder. Its familiar weight pressed into him like an old companion. Mariah met him at the curb, her face pale but resolute. She carried a slim briefcase tucked tightly under her arm. "They know we're coming," she said. "Good," Samuel replied. "Then they'll be waiting to hear what they've denied for 50 years. By the time they reached the downtown branch, the steps were crowded. Reporters clustered with microphones. Cameras jostled for the best angle. Customers lingered at the edges, their voices buzzing with speculation. And at the top of the marble stairs, Richard Whittaker stood flanked by lawyers in tailored suits, his jaw set in grim determination. Samuel climbed steadily, each step slow but unyielding. The crowd parted, murmurs falling into silence. At the landing, he stopped, squaring himself before the bank's brass doors. "For half a century," he said, his voice resonant, "my name was buried, my legacy stolen. Today, I place the truth back where it belongs." He opened the sack and drew out the charter, holding it high so cameras could capture the embossed seal. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrusting, questions flying. Richard raised his hand, barking into the noise. "Forgery! Lies! Don't listen to this circus!" But his voice cracked under the pressure of evidence. Samuel laid the charter across a podium hastily set for the press. He spread additional documents, letters, receipts, photographs. Each sheet landed like a stone, building a wall of proof. Mariah stepped forward, her voice carrying clear. "These are authenticated by state records, not copies. Originals. Proof that Bayou Trust was founded as a partnership. Samuel Reed and Thomas Whittaker." The crowd erupted, half in disbelief, half in vindication. Reporters shouted, "Is this true?" "Why hide it? What does this mean for ownership?" Richard lunged, his composure shattered. "These papers mean nothing. This man is a fraud." He snatched at a deed, but Samuel's hand shot out, firm, reclaiming it before cameras. Their eyes locked. One man burning with desperation, the other steady with endurance. "Fraud?" Samuel's voice was steel. He drew the brass key from his coat, lifting it high for all to see. "Then explain this. The master key to Vault Row 1857, installed in 1963, engraved with a serial that matches the bank's own installation records. If I am a fraud, then how do I hold the key your grandfather locked himself?" Gasps tore through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. The glint of the key under morning sun was undeniable. Even Richard faltered, his hands twitching uselessly. At that moment, a uniformed officer stepped forward, a folded paper in hand. His voice carried across the steps. "By order of the state court, an injunction has been filed. All claims of Bayou Trust's ownership are to be reviewed. Effective immediately," the crowd roared, questions crashing like waves. Richard's face blanched. Samuel remained calm, almost serene. He turned to the cameras, his voice low but powerful. "This is not just about me. It is about every man and woman erased by lies. Every hand that built, only to see their names stripped away. Today, the truth has stepped out of the shadows." He tucked the charter back into the sack, slid the key into his pocket, and faced the bank's brass doors. "This is not the end," he said. "It is the beginning," reporters shouted. Flashbulbs exploded. Richard muttered curses under his breath, his empire unraveling thread by thread. But Samuel did not look at him. His gaze was on the people, the tellers watching from windows, the customers craning their necks. The city that had once turned its back, and as he descended the marble steps, Mariah walking at his side, he felt the weight of betrayal lift. Replaced by something heavier but brighter, the burden of legacy restored. The question lingered in the morning air, whispered by those who watched and recorded, by those who doubted and those who believed. If truth can survive 50 years of silence, what else might we have buried too deep to see? Night descended over New Orleans like a heavy curtain, but the city did not sleep. News channels replayed the footage of Samuel on the courthouse steps, the brass key glinting under the sun, the charter spread open like a wound finally exposed. Talk shows dissected every word, historians were called in to weigh authenticity, and social media churned endlessly. Clips, memes, debates, arguments. For the first time in half a century, Samuel's name was not whispered in dismissal. It was shouted, doubted, defended. It lived again. In his apartment, Samuel sat at his table, the sack resting beside him. Its knot loosened, as if it too had exhaled after years of restraint. Across from him sat Mariah, her face pale but her eyes alive with determination. Between them lay a scattered field of documents, letters, photographs. And at the center, as always, the brass key. "They'll come harder now," Mariah said softly. "The Whitakers won't just rely on lies. They'll dig deeper. They'll call in favors. They'll make this personal." Samuel leaned back, weary but resolute. "It was personal the moment they erased me. But lies can't last forever. They've spent half a century protecting their story. I've spent the same time protecting the truth." He gestured to the papers. "This is more than proof. It's a mirror, and they're terrified to see themselves in it." Mariah reached for a photograph, the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Samuel's young face half hidden behind Thomas Whitaker. She traced his outline with her fingertip. "You were there. The world just forgot." "No," Samuel corrected gently. "The world was told to forget." "There's a difference." The phone rang, shrill against the silence. Samuel answered, his voice steady. On the line, a young reporter introduced herself, eager, relentless. "Mr. Duval, tomorrow we're running a feature on your claim. We want your voice in it. People deserve to hear directly from you." Samuel hesitated. For years, silence had been his armor. But he saw the fire in Mariah's eyes, the way truth burned hotter when shared. "I'll speak," he said at last. "But not for myself. For those who built and were buried." When he hung up, Mariah leaned forward. "So what now? Where does this go?" Samuel lifted the key, turning it slowly in his hand, its teeth catching the dim light. "Now," he said, "we open the vault." The words settled like thunder. Mariah's breath caught. "You mean—" "Yes. Vault number 1857. The records they never destroyed. The ledgers that still carry my name, my stake. They can shred paper upstairs, but steel remembers. And once we open it, their lies collapse." Mariah's pulse quickened. "When?" Samuel set the key down with a finality that shook the table. "Soon, when the eyes of this city are watching." Outside, the hum of New Orleans carried on. Streetcars, horns, voices blending into the music of a city that thrived on spectacle. But within Samuel's small apartment, history bent. A plan was forming, one that would force Bayou Trust to face the truth it had buried. Samuel stood, his joints stiff but his presence commanding. He gathered the papers back into the sack, tied it shut, and rested his hand on its worn surface. His eyes lifted to Mariah's, steady and unyielding. 50 years ago, betrayal stole my name. Tomorrow, justice takes it back." Mariah nodded, her throat tight, her resolve unshaken. She understood now what she had stepped into, a war not of fists, but of memory. And she would not turn away. Together, they looked down at the table where the brass key lay gleaming. It was small, ordinary to the unknowing eye. But to them it was everything. Proof, weapon, promise. Samuel reached for it, sliding it back into his pocket. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost to himself. "You waited long enough." The apartment fell quiet, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm that would sweep through marble halls and glass offices, tearing away facades and leaving only the truth. And as Samuel turned out the light, the question rose once more, heavy and unshakable. When the vault opens, what else will it reveal? About betrayal, about justice, about the cost of waiting half a century for the truth? Morning light spilled across the Mississippi, gilding the water in bronze and fire. The city stirred awake, but in Samuel's apartment no one had slept. Documents covered the table like a battlefield map, every page a weapon, every letter a shield. Samuel moved among them slowly, his hands steady, his mind sharpened by purpose. David Wright, the law student Mariah had brought into the fold, leaned over a stack of property deeds. His glasses slid down his nose, but he didn't pause. "These," he said, tapping a cluster of papers, "tie directly back to the founding account. If we get the vault records to match, it's ironclad." Mariah paced the room, her heels clicking against the floor. "Ironclad won't stop them from trying to bury it. They'll unleash everything, judges, politicians, media. The Whitakers have built their empire on silence." "Then we'll make noise," Samuel said simply. His voice carried no strain, only quiet conviction. He sat at the head of the table, the sack beside him like an old comrade. He reached inside and withdrew the brass key, laying it on the table's center. Its dull gleam pulled every eye. David stared at it, reverent. "That's more than a key. That's leverage. And once we turn it, there's no going back." Samuel's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "No going back" ended the day Thomas signed me out of my own bank. Every step since has been toward this moment. He looked at Mariah. "You understand the danger? Once we walk into that vault, the city will split. Half will call me a thief. Half will call me a fool. But if the truth shines, they'll have no choice but to call you owner," Mariah finished. Her voice wavered, but the steel in it was undeniable. A silence fell, heavy but charged. Then David cleared his throat. "We need strategy. Not just papers, not just passion. Witnesses, cameras, legal observers. If they try to shut the vault, we'll already have proof." Mariah stopped pacing. "I'll call in friends. Not just journalists, people who care about justice. Activists, historians, let them see it with their own eyes. The Whitakers control narratives, but they can't control every camera in the room." Samuel nodded, approving. "Good. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be seen." The air in the small apartment felt alive, as though history itself had leaned close to listen. They spoke in turns, refining details, anticipating obstacles. Each time doubt crept in, Samuel's hand drifted to the brass key, grounding the room with its quiet authority. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, Mariah slumped into a chair, exhaustion evident. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that maybe it would have been easier to let it go? To live without this fight?" Samuel regarded her with a gaze both weary and fierce. "Easier? Yes. But ease was never the point. Betrayal carves a wound, Mariah. You can cover it, you can pretend it healed, but it festers until truth cleans it. I could not die with rot inside me. I had to bring the light." David closed a folder, his jaw set. "Then tomorrow we open the vault." Samuel picked up the key, turning it once before sliding it back into his pocket. He rose, slow but tall, the weight of decades somehow lending him strength. "Tomorrow," he repeated. 50 years of waiting ends tomorrow. Outside, the city buzzed unaware, its streets alive with commerce and laughter. But beneath its surface, gears of conflict turned. The Whitakers were already moving pieces, drafting filings, buying headlines, summoning allies, and yet for the first time their certainty cracked. Somewhere in the depths of the old bank, Box 1857 waited. Steele remembered what greed tried to erase. Samuel stood at his window, watching the river roll past, eternal and unhurried. "The Mississippi never forgets," he murmured. "It carries everything, silt, secrets, stories. And like it, so do I." Behind him, Mariah and David exchanged a glance, seeing not just an old man but a storm walking in flesh. The question that hung between them was one they dared not voice. When the vault opens, will it bring salvation? Or will betrayal strike again, sharper than before? The morning of the vault opening broke with a sharp chill, unusual for New Orleans. Samuel dressed deliberately, layer by layer, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. The charcoal suit lay across the bed, pressed and dignified. He slid into it as though donning armor. The brass key, polished overnight, slipped into his pocket where it had lived for decades, silent and patient. Mariah arrived first, her face drawn but resolute. She carried a small camera bag slung across her shoulder. "I've called everyone," she said, her voice low. "Local press, independent journalists, even a few historians. They'll meet us at the bank." David entered moments later, carrying a briefcase so heavy it seemed to weigh more than him. Legal codes, property statutes, case law precedents, he listed breathlessly. If they try to block us, we argue the law in front of their cameras. He adjusted his glasses, his determination burning. Samuel only nodded. We walk with dignity. No shouting, no anger. Let the truth be the weapon. By the time they stepped into the street, a crowd had already begun to gather. News vans lined the block. Curious onlookers leaned from balconies. Phones hovered in every direction, live streams humming to audiences worldwide. The city could sense the moment, the way history sometimes trembles before breaking open. The bank loomed ahead, its stone facade carved with old symbols of wealth and permanence. It had stood for a century, indifferent to the lives it consumed. Today, however, its walls would be forced to speak. At the entrance, two guards moved forward, their expressions conflicted. One of them had dragged Samuel out days earlier. Now he stepped aside, shame flickering across his face. Samuel passed without a word, his stride slow but unyielding. Inside, the lobby buzzed with tension. Customers pretended to continue their business, but their eyes followed every step. Cameras clicked, microphones hovered. The polished marble gleamed as though eager to witness what was coming. Richard Whitaker emerged from an office, pale and trembling despite his expensive suit. You can't be here, he barked. There's a restraining order. You'll be arrested. David lifted a folded paper, his voice ringing out clear. That order has been stayed by Judge Allen, pending review of new evidence. He held it high so the cameras captured every line. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Samuel moved to the center of the lobby, the same spot where mockery once surrounded him. His voice rose, steady, echoing off the marble. I come not as a trespasser, but as what I have always been. The founder, the owner. And today we walk into the vault to show you what they tried to bury. Gasps scattered through the room. A reporter's voice cut above the noise. Mr. Duval, are you saying the proof still exists in the bank itself? Samuel reached into his pocket, lifting the brass key high. Light flashed against it, catching the eyes of everyone present. Steel remembers, he declared. Paper may burn, men may lie, but steel remembers. The words landed like thunder. Cameras surged forward. Phones streamed live, and as silence settled, the question was no longer whether Samuel was mad, but what secrets that steel door still held. Charles Whitaker entered then, flanked by lawyers, his face carved with fury. This is theater, he spat. An old man spinning fairy tales. You think a key proves ownership? You think a dusty box will undo 50 years of business? He sneered at the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to watch a fraud collapse. Samuel faced him, unblinking. Not collapse, he corrected. Reveal! The bank manager, caught between fear and law, finally gestured toward the back. Very well. If the box exists, let him open it. But under witness. And so they walked. Samuel, Mariah, David, lawyers, guards, reporters, an unlikely procession moving deeper into the bank's belly. Down corridors lined with polished wood, past locked doors, until they reached the old vault. Its steel face loomed, pitted with age, the logo of Bayou Trust faded but unbroken. Samuel stepped forward. He placed the key into the lock. Cameras crowded closer, breaths held. For 50 years he had waited for this moment, carrying betrayal like a scar, dignity like a shield. And as he turned the key, the tumblers clicked with a sound that silenced the world. The vault door shuddered, groaned, and began to open. What would it reveal? Proof of betrayal? Proof of ownership or secrets darker than anyone dared imagine? The vault door opened with a metallic sigh, the sound deep and resonant, as though the walls themselves were exhaling secrets long trapped inside. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by camera flashes and the harsh beams of reporters' lights. Every eye strained toward the widening gap. Inside, rows of brass-faced boxes lined the walls, each stamped with numbers faded by time. The smell of iron and old paper lingered, heavy with memory. The manager's voice shook as he said, Box 1423, still active. Fees marked paid in perpetuity. Samuel stepped forward. The brass key gleamed once more as he slid it into the lock. It turned with the ease of something meant to be remembered. With a steady pull, the drawer slid out, heavier than expected, its weight carrying decades of silence. He placed it carefully on the table provided in the vault's private room. Mariah set her camera rolling, while David arranged witnesses around the table. Lawyers leaned in, notebooks ready. The hum of the crowd outside filtered faintly through the steel door. Samuel's hands lingered over the lid. His voice, though soft, carried through the room. 50 years. 50 years since I sealed this, knowing that betrayal would one day demand proof. And now it opens before the world. He lifted the lid. Inside lay bundles of documents wrapped in wax paper, their edges yellowed but intact. Atop them rested a leather folder stamped with the original seal of the Bayou Trust. Gasps rippled through the room. The folder alone was a relic, its embossing official, its age undeniable. David's voice shook as he read the first page aloud. Charter of the Bayou Trust Bank, April 12, 1963. Founding owners, Samuel Duval, 51%. Thomas Whitaker, 49%. He stopped, breath catching. It's signed. Both names notarized, registered. One of the lawyers confirmed the seal with a magnifier. Authentic. This is not a forgery. The paper, the ink, the stamp, all match the era. Mariah steadied the camera closer. The world is watching, she whispered. Beneath the charter lay letters, fragile but legible. Samuel lifted one carefully, dated months after the bank's founding. He read aloud, Dear Samuel, without your additional funds, the bank would have collapsed. I acknowledge your majority ownership as agreed. The signature at the bottom, Thomas Whitaker. Shock spread through the room. A murmur of voices rose outside the vault. Reporters pressed against the glass partition, straining for details. Charles Whitaker, his face rigid, stepped forward. Lies. These are clever forgeries. My grandfather. Your grandfather's handwriting, Samuel interrupted, holding up another letter. Acknowledging debts, acknowledging my majority. The scar on his hand proves which letters came after which date. Timestamps, photographs, all preserved. He drew out a set of photographs, crisp, black and white, edges curled with age. They showed Samuel and Thomas standing before the bank, their hands clasped in partnership. In later ones, Thomas bore the scar from his accident, the scar absent from the supposed sale agreements Charles had paraded earlier. The visual evidence hit like a hammer. Even the lawyers whispering in Charles's ear began to retreat. One of the independent historians in the room leaned closer, examining the photos. These are studio-stamped. Official records. They can't be fabricated. Reporters outside the glass shouted questions, their words a blur. Live streams flooded the internet. The narrative of a delusional old man was cracking, splintering in real time. Samuel looked down at the final envelope in the box. His hand trembled as he opened it. Inside lay stock certificates, pristine golden seals bright as if untouched by time. He spread them across the table. Series A stock? Original issues, all in my name. Every certificate preserved. David's voice rose, charged with conviction. This proves ownership. This proves decades of theft. And it proves the Whitakers knew the truth all along. Charles lunged forward, fury twisting his face. Enough! These papers mean nothing! The courts will never... But the words faltered. Police officers, summoned quietly during the process, stepped into the vault. Their presence shifted the air. One of them addressed Charles directly. Sir, you are under investigation for attempted fraud and falsification of financial documents. The room erupted in shouts, cameras flashing wildly. Charles tried to protest, but his words drowned beneath the surge of voices, the clamor of evidence unveiled at last. Samuel remained seated, calm, as though the years had prepared him for this moment. His hand rested lightly on the charter, his eyes steady. The truth, he said quietly, though everyone heard, waits patiently. But it never dies. Reporters pressed closer, their voices layering questions. What happens next? Will the bank return to its rightful owner? How deep does the Whitaker fraud go? And Samuel, dignified, lifted his gaze. What happens next, he said, is justice, no longer whispered but spoken aloud. The box lay open, its contents undeniable. Outside the crowd roared. But within the vault, silence reigned for a breath longer, as if history itself bowed to the weight of proof finally revealed. The crowd outside the vault surged forward as Samuel and his allies emerged, carrying the leather folder and stock certificates with deliberate care. The marble lobby, once a stage for mockery, now trembled with the sound of reporters shouting over one another. Microphones thrust forward like weapons, camera lights blinding in their hunger. Mr. Duval, does this mean you're now the rightful owner of Bayou Trust? Will the Whitakers face federal charges? How did you hide these documents for 50 years? Samuel raised a hand, and astonishingly, the noise softened. His voice, calm and resonant, carried through the marble hall. The truth is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been robbed, silenced, or erased. What you saw today was not just a vault. It was memory refusing to be buried. The words rippled outward. Even the clerks who once smirked at his presence lowered their eyes, shame burning across their faces. But as the applause began to rise, another sound cut through the lobby, the sharp click of expensive shoes. Charles Whitaker strode forward, flanked by a new cadre of lawyers, his face pale but defiant. Though his uncle's power had shielded him for decades, cracks now showed in his composure. "This spectacle proves nothing," Charles barked, his voice echoing. "Documents can be forged. Photos can be staged. My family built this institution, and no parade of relics will change that." Gasps scattered among the crowd. Reporters leaned in, eager for confrontation. Samuel didn't flinch. He laid the charter open on a counter where everyone could see. The gold seal glimmered beneath the lights. "Your family built its wealth on lies," he said evenly. "But lies do not age well. Look at these letters. Your grandfather's own hand, his own admissions. They outlived him, and now they outlive you." The tension spiked as police officers stepped closer to Charles. One held a file thick with warrants. Another adjusted his cuffs, ready, but Charles was not finished. He turned, addressing the cameras with desperate fire. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled. This man is a fraud. Do you think justice is decided in a dusty box? Do you think power surrenders because an old man waves paper in the air? Power is here. Power is in the courts, the media, the money that shapes what you believe." His words, meant to reassert control, only revealed his panic. Reporters murmured, their lenses capturing every drop of sweat on his temple. The public could smell fear. Mariah stepped forward, her voice steady but fierce. "Power is also in conscience. In truth recorded and preserved. You may twist stories, Mr. Whitaker, but you cannot erase signatures, photographs, and official seals." She held up her camera. "And now, millions have witnessed what you tried to bury." The police officer cleared his throat, drawing the room back into focus. "Charles Whitaker, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of federal banking documents, and obstruction of justice." Gasps erupted again. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound final and damning. Charles tried to sneer, but it came out as a broken grimace. He shouted one last time, "This isn't over. The courts, the press, they still belong to us." But his words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd as he was led away. Phones streamed every second of his humiliation. Outside, cheers rose when the doors opened to reveal Charles Whitaker in chains. Inside, Samuel stood taller than he had in years. Yet he did not smile. His expression was solemn, his voice deliberate. "This is not triumph," he told the cameras. "This is reckoning. What was stolen is only now returning to light. But how many others were buried without keys, without vaults, without proof? This story is larger than me." Reporters leaned closer. One asked, "What will you do now, Mr. Duval?" Samuel looked down at the charter, then back at the marble ceiling that once seemed to crush him. "Now," he said, "we begin to restore what was promised in 1963, a bank for all. A future where dignity is not mocked and justice is not delayed." The crowd erupted in applause. Some wept openly. Employees who once looked through him now extended tentative hands, as though reaching for absolution. David closed the leather folder with reverence, his voice low but firm. "This is evidence, but it's also legacy. And it will stand in court, in history, in memory." Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "It will stand because people like you and Mariah carried it when I was tired. That is how truth survives, through hands willing to bear its weight." The cameras flashed again, capturing the image of Samuel Duval, flanked by the next generation, documents in hand, dignity unbroken. The bank lobby no longer hummed with derision, but with the electricity of history turning its page. Yet beneath the applause, a question lingered, carried in whispers, scrawled across notepads, tweeted across the globe. If one family's betrayal could last 50 years, how many others remain hidden behind steel and silence? The press conference was scheduled for the following morning in a grand hall near Jackson Square. By dawn, the building was already surrounded, reporters setting up tripods, community leaders filing in, curious citizens pressing against barricades. The air vibrated with anticipation, as if the entire city sensed that what would be spoken today was larger than one man, larger than one bank. Inside, the hall gleamed with sunlight pouring through tall, arched windows. Rows of wooden chairs faced a modest stage where a single podium stood. Behind it, a display case held the leather folder and the brass key, positioned not as relics of the past, but as symbols reclaimed. Samuel arrived, flanked by Mariah and David, both looking worn yet resolute. He wore a dark navy suit, his silver hair carefully combed. The weight of decades clung to his shoulders, but so did dignity. As he stepped onto the stage, the murmur of the crowd hushed into expectant silence. "Good morning," Samuel began, his voice steady though softened by age. "Yesterday you saw documents pulled from a vault. Papers with seals and signatures, stock certificates older than some of you in this room. But those papers do not tell the whole story. They are evidence, yes, but more than that, they are testimony to betrayal." He paused, letting the words settle. Cameras clicked furiously. 50 years ago, I built a bank with a partner I trusted. A partner who looked me in the eye and promised equality. Together, we spoke of building something new, an institution that would treat every man and woman with dignity. But when fear and greed whispered to him, he chose betrayal. My name was erased. My work stolen. My community denied the chance to see a black man lead where history said we could not. The hall remained silent, save for the scratching of pens and the soft hum of live stream equipment. But here is the truth, Samuel continued, his voice gaining strength. You can bury a man's name. You can forge his signature. You can strip his ownership on paper, but you cannot erase the fact that he was there. You cannot erase the truth carried in memory, in scars, in steel keys that still open vaults. The words struck deep. Even seasoned reporters shifted uncomfortably, moved despite their cynicism. Mariah stepped forward then, her hands trembling only slightly as she took the microphone. When I first saw those documents, I knew they were real. Not just because of seals or stamps, but because of what they represented. Generations of men like Samuel, who built, who created, and who were told they did not belong. We carry those losses in silence. Yesterday broke that silence. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. I am proud to stand with him. And I ask each of you, how many more vaults remain unopened? How many stories of betrayal lie waiting for someone brave enough to unlock them? Applause rippled through the crowd, growing louder until it filled the hall. David took his turn at the podium, adjusting his glasses before speaking. As a student of law, I've read about cases like this in textbooks. But textbooks rarely tell you the pain, the endurance, the decades lost. What we hold here is not just evidence for courtrooms. It's a mirror held to America's past. And it asks, will we keep looking away? Or will we face what was stolen? The applause grew thunderous. Reporters leaned in with new urgency, sensing history being shaped in real time. Samuel returned to the podium for the closing words. His voice dropped low, intimate, as though speaking to each soul in the room. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice preserved, waiting for its moment. And now that moment has come. The Bayou Trust will no longer stand as a monument to theft. It will become what it was always meant to be, a force for empowerment. Today, I announce a $50 million fund dedicated to small businesses, scholarships, and home ownership in the very neighborhoods betrayed 50 years ago. The hall erupted. Cheers thundered. Some wept openly. Reporters scrambled to push the story live across every network. Samuel raised the brass key, holding it high. This key once opened a vault of secrets. Now it opens a future. The cameras caught the image, A man once mocked as a fool, now standing as a symbol of truth restored. And as the applause surged, a lingering question burned brighter. If one man's persistence could reclaim a stolen legacy after half a century, what other legacies wait for their day in the sun? Justice is never quick. It does not move at the pace of power or the schedule of wealth. It waits, it listens. And when the time is right, it returns. For Samuel, the vault was not just steel and paper. It was proof that betrayal cannot bury memory, that dignity carried long enough will break through silence. And so his story leaves us with a question. How many other legacies wait, locked in the dark until someone dares to bring them into the light? If this story moved you, if it made you think about truth, betrayal, and resilience, please take a moment to subscribe to Black Voices Justice. This channel exists to preserve stories like Samuel's, stories too often erased, mocked, or forgotten. Hit the bell, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and join a community committed to memory, justice, and truth. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay inspired, and never let the silence win.